Thank you for joining us for Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. We take a subject, we dig into it in depth, and today Kyle is going to dig after all those shrooms in the landscape and the trees and all those places where those of us who really are wanting a morel are going to have to try to figure out what else to eat, perhaps, right, Kyle?
Yes, perhaps. And again, always have to be mindful about eating mushrooms that you find in the landscape. Unless you are 100% sure and have the experience and the expertise, it's really recommended not to eat anything that you find while out foraging, just because there are a lot of lookalikes, and some of them can be quite toxic. So always be careful.
Some of them can be toxic enough to go belly up?
There are a few. Luckily, not in Nebraska, we don't have a ton of those, but we certainly have those that will cause, we'll say gastrointestinal distress.
In other words, worse than the flu.
Yes, yep.
So let's start with your mask. Can you identify the mushrooms on your mask?
Well,
it's just sort of hilarious.
Yeah, we have there's a few different ones on here. We have an oyster mushroom and then some bolites as well, and it kind of just there we go. So the yellow one here is one of our kind of standard oyster mushrooms, and a bolite, kind of the bolite class right over here is what we're looking at, and one of these down here is more like one of our agarics, and so the agarics, those do tend to be some of our more poisonous ones, and so there is kind of a general rule of thumb that if you do see mushrooms with red caps when you're out foraging or anything like that, you probably just want to steer clear of them. Again, like I said, they're not the most common in Nebraska, and there are some edible mushrooms with red caps. However, some of the most poisonous mushrooms do tend to have those red caps too. So.
Excellent. So we want to invite our audience, of course, to comment and tell us what you think about this segment. Send us all of your cool information, because Kyle is going to do an excellent job of starting with ID, right? Is that how we're going to start tonight, since you also brought lots of other props? And I know you sent some great pictures.
Mm-hmm. We certainly can. So yeah, really when thinking about mushroom ID, we want to take a lot of pictures. And so there are a few different things that we would like to look for whenever we are looking at mushrooms. And so first is, where is the mushroom growing? Is it growing in the lawn? Is it growing on a tree? Where are we seeing it? So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then the next thing we often want to think about is there a central stem to this mushroom? And so again, that can help differentiate some of our polypores from our more standard mushrooms. And then once we've decided that there is a central stem, what does the underside of the cap look like? Do we have some nice gills like on this one here, or is it more pores? And so again, the gilled mushrooms, here we go. A lot of different types of mushrooms do have gills. The one that I'm holding up right now is this is a Lepiota, or in the genus Lepiota, one of our common Paracel mushrooms. It is fairly dried, but you can really see those gills kind of all the way throughout. And now compare that to this other one, and this is a Polypore mushroom. This is actually a turkey tail, is the common name for it. But if we zoom in, we can really see that there's just a whole bunch of tiny pores on the underside of it. You may also get some larger holes, kind of like we were seeing on this, because in addition to people, a lot of other things eat mushrooms too. There's a lot of insects that do, other animals that eat them. Deer are very prolific mushroom eaters as well.
Well, and I know the one with the gills, if you buy beautiful big mushrooms at the grocery store to stuff, those are typically something that has the gills.
Yep, they are, and I know everybody always thinks about the oh, I'm drawing a blank on the
Button or
yep,
shiitake?
buttons are the big ones, and yep, and they do have nice gills underneath them. But one of the things with those mushrooms with gills, you want to be when you're cleaning them, a lot of stuff can get caught up in those gills too. And so again, a lot of other fungi, a lot of insects, just a lot of soil, a lot of dirt. So when cleaning them, always a good idea just to take maybe a damp paper towel and kind of dab underneath those to try to get as much of the excess stuff out from those gills as possible, because they can really impact the flavor on occasion.
Cool. All right. So what else did you bring? And then we'll go to your pictures.
All right. Well, again, so have just a few dried ones. I went out 3 different times foraging within the last couple of days, and I couldn't find anything. Part of this may have been the fact that I had a 15-month-old toddler at my heels, and she wasn't moving the quickest either. But luckily we can preserve a lot of mushrooms, and so I did bring some older ones that we had. Right here, I'll go ahead and hold up one of our more prized mushrooms, and I apologize for the color. When this was collected, it was bright orange, and it was growing about 10 feet up a tree, which is very typical of our chicken of the woods fungi or hen of the woods fungi. Very, very tasty if you are out eating them. And some of the other. Another one that I had brought out, and this one was also collected off of a tree, but this is a Tremedes in the genus Tremedes, but just kind of bright red, and this is the top side of it. And then again, if we look at the bottom side, and this is going to be tough to see, but this is another one of our Polypore mushrooms, and so just a whole bunch of little tubes in the bottom side of that. And let's see, another one this was one that was found on actually growing out of an apple tree stump. But this is a turkey tail fungus. And so I have 2 different types of turkey tails here. Again, turkey tail is one of the common names for it, but there can really be a difference in color variation. Sometimes they're kind of this bright red and oranges and things like that. In other cases, like we have on this smaller one, it's almost a lot more grays and almost some blues that we're seeing as well. But again, when fresh, I've said this a few times, pathologists aren't the greatest at naming things, and the same kind of goes for a lot of mushroom experts as well. They look like a turkey tail.
They do, actually.
And there's even kind of a small, you can even feel some small hairs on the
little pin feathers.
Exactly.
Perfect.
So
Fun.
So that is that. Another one of our more prized mushrooms that I brought. This is an oyster mushroom, and so Polypore is the scientific name for it. Again, typically is growing on wood. This is not one that you will see sprouting out of your lawn. But one of the things that is kind of helps to identify a lot of our oyster mushrooms is if we look at the gills. Oh, there we go. Notice that the gills, they start at the cap, but then they also tend to run down, as opposed to some of the other mushrooms, like the Lepiota one that we have, where we have the gills that just end right at where that central stem is. And so again, some more ways to differentiate those mushrooms. Do the gills, do they run down the stem, or do they kind of stop at the stem as well?
Awesome, excellent. Those are fun and interesting. So you also brought or sent us a whole bunch of pictures.
Whole bunch of pictures.
Let's start with those, and you can talk a little bit about each one of those. I think your first one up is maybe another Paracel.
Yep. Yeah.
So mistaken.
It is, and so that's actually a fresh version of the one that I was showing, and this one is quite large. They're not always this big, but this specimen was about 8 inches in diameter, so not quite the size of a dinner plate, but again, pretty large. These are the ones that you will commonly see and you're just popping up in your yard. And again, they're feeding on some sort of woody material, whether that's old mulch, whether that's tree roots, some sort of woody material a little bit further down in the soil profile. But when people think of mushrooms, this tends to be what they really think of.
And they start like a closed umbrella, or and then they open.
Yep, and then they will slowly open, slowly or overnight open,
right.
depending on the environmental conditions. But if we have kind of moderate to warm temperatures and adequate moisture, these things really can appear overnight.
Excellent. All right, your next one, we get this one all the time. This is stinkhorn.
Stinkhorns, and so these are the stinkhorn eggs, actually. And there was somebody else who occasionally sits on the backyard farmer panel, who one time collected some what he thought were stinkhorn eggs. They were actually snake eggs instead. So Dennis had a field day with them. But these stinkhorns, we'll often find these showing up usually in mulch beds, and they'll come up, be bright orange or a bright red color, and as the name implies, they smell. Then if you dig down 6 to 8 inches, this is what we tend to find are these actual eggs. And every year when we have adequate environmental conditions, that stinkhorn just pops back up.
Cool. I think we might have a picture of them. Yep, split open.
Yeah, and there we can even see the mushroom inside of, or the fruiting body that will eventually poke its head out of the ground.
Fun. All right, your next one is a chicken of the woods in the tree, I think.
Yep, it is, and so that's the color that the one that I had collected originally had. Again, not the same one, but chicken of the woods mushrooms. And really, a lot of the mushrooms that we find growing on trees, they can be a sign of not the greatest tree health,
right,
because they are feeding on that hardwood, and so there is a wound, some sort of opening that allowed that fungus to get in, and it is rotting away the inside of the tree. So just something to keep an eye on.
All right, your next one looks like hare's ear.
Yes, and so some of our general cup fungi. There are a few different types of cup fungi. Also, they sometimes they'll almost be referred to as bird's nest, is another one that we often see. The bird's nests are quite a bit smaller, but these cup fungi, they tend to produce the spores down inside the middle of that cup there.
Very fun. And then we have everybody's favorite puffball.
A puffball, yes. And a lot of different types of puffballs that are out there. Sometimes they're going to be kind of this darker yellowish brown color, or they might be bright white. I think every year you'll see a picture from somewhere in the South of somebody who's collected a puffball that's the size of your head.
Right. And you did a movie, I think.
Yeah, and so I hope that the movie worked, but and so that little puff of dust that came out, those are all of the fungal spores. And so as we're out walking around, stepping on puffballs, things like that forces those spores out. They will then land on another piece of woody tissue and start the whole cycle over again.
Yeah, those are fun. All right, so then we have edible versus not with the fabulous Morel.
Yeah, and so this is the time of year when everybody wants to be out finding morels. And aside from one person that I know, everybody's only found a couple. And so we'll see. The hope is that with some of the recent moisture that we had, and now that temperatures are a little bit warmer, that morels will become a little bit more common. But so we have the morels, and they are This is our very, very typical morel. If you look down towards the base, we can see the stem that appears there. And then the very prototypical cap or head that we have with those morels.
And then the next one is the false.
Is the false morel, yep. And so this one is false morels. If they really don't look a whole lot like the true morels, but if to an untrained eye, they can be fairly easily mistaken. But these false morels, they almost just look like a brain. And so if you imagine a kind of dark reddish brown brain sitting on the ground, that tends to be what our false morels look like.
All right, and don't eat them.
Don't eat them. Another good way to differentiate a true morel from a false morel is to split it open. And if it's hollow on the inside, it's a true morel. If it's not hollow on the inside, it's going to be a false morel, and you'll want to leave that one alone.
All right, and then, so we have a little bit of ID, I think, in our few remaining minutes, the first being the puffball again.
Yes.
So we identify those by the puff.
Exactly, just by the puff. And so I had mentioned we kind of want to look, so is there a central stem that we're seeing on the mushroom? And puffballs, there tends not to be. Now, if we look towards the base of this picture, we can see where it originated, but there's not a stem, not a stalk that we're seeing, or stipe is the actual term for it. But they're just much more round than our other ones. And the next picture that we should have
central stem and cap.
Exactly.
There
yep.
We go.
And so these are much more common for, or at least mushrooms that are showing up in the yard, where we do have that nice central stem. This is another one that as it opens up, this is a Lepiota mushroom, and a different species. But as it opens up, that cap really will get quite a bit larger, and we'll be able to see the gills on the underside of that cap too.
All right, and then I think we have a picture of the underside gills.
Yep, and again, it's just very important to be looking at all parts of that mushroom. The top of the cap, the bottom of the cap, all these differences really can go a long way in helping to identify them.
All right, you have a polypore underside.
Yeah, and so this is the underside of a pheasant's back mushroom, also known as a dryad's saddle. But these can get quite large. So 12 inches across. We have the great size identifier there at the bottom of this picture. Always want to send in something so we have an idea of how big this picture is. And as you can see, this pheasant's back is over a foot in diameter.
Is that an edible one or no?
At this point, no. However, when fresh, they actually can be fairly tasty. Unfortunately, they dry out pretty quickly, and once they're dried and a little bit old, I haven't eaten an older one, but I'm told they taste just kind of like cardboard. Yeah. So if you want to eat cardboard, then you can eat them, but it's not recommended.
All right. Your next one is the ash bolite.
Yes, and so the ash bolite is one of the more interesting ones. It's not a true bolite, but this one is always found in association with ash trees. It actually, so it's a combination of the ash tree, an insect that feeds on the ash tree, and this mushroom. And so the insect is actually feeding on the roots of the ash tree. That allows the ash bolite to colonize those roots, and they pop up out of the ground. But one of the things that I wanted to mention with this picture is these mushrooms are growing in clumps. And so when we are looking at mushrooms that are on the ground or even on trees, are they growing in clumps or are they growing more singularly?
Fun, and I think your last one before we close is the Paracel with Rings and Gills.
Yeah, and so here we have just another picture of that, of one of those large Paracel mushrooms that so often show up in the lawn. Really good picture of the underside of the gills there. We can see that the gills don't go down the stem at all. The other thing that we can see here is that there is a ring around that stem. And the presence of a ring is another determining factor when helping to identify mushrooms too.
Awesome. That was great, Kyle. We hope you enjoyed digging deeper with Kyle. And yes, don't eat those mushrooms without knowing what you're eating. You can watch us, of course, at 8 p.m. on Thursdays on Facebook. Give us your contact or your comments. And thanks for digging deeper with us on Backyard Farmer.